Hello, welcome, and thank you for being part of WorkSafe's Preventing Family Violence and Supporting Victorians in the Workplace webinar. My name is Kelly Harris, and I'll be your host for this session. This morning, we'll explore the following topics. Workplaces have an important role to play in preventing and responding to family violence. Family violence is a significant community issue. It is also an occupational health and safety risk because it can extend into the workplace, and how family violence can affect the working environment and what can be done about it. Today, I'm joined by two sector experts, Tania Farha, the CEO at Safe and Equal. Welcome, Tania.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is great to have you. And we have Jodie Peskett, who is a Program Officer of the Psychosocial Health Program at WorkSafe Victoria. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks.
So thank you both for being with us, and thank you all for joining us today. We will take audience questions later, but feel free to enter them at any time so that they are ready for when we get to the Q&A. And please note, if any of the content in the session is emotionally challenging, please take some time for yourself and feel free to tune out. So let's start by introducing Safe and Equal. Safe and Equal are the peak body for Victorian organisations that specialise in family and gender-based violence across the continuum, including primary prevention, early intervention, response and recovery. So Tania, as Safe and Equal CEO, could we ask you what family and domestic violence is and what are some examples of it?
Thanks, Kelly. But firstly, can I please just acknowledge I'm joining you all from Wurundjeri land. So I acknowledge elders past and present, and that this was and always will be Aboriginal lands. And can I also recognise victim survivors? We always do this as a matter of course in Safe and Equal because we know that in any audience we speak to, there's going to be survivors, and this is why we do our work. We do it to make sure that we support and try and prevent the next generation of survivors, of course. So getting back to Kelly's question, you're all probably quite aware of the terms and you've heard them a lot, probably in the public space over the particularly last few years, that there are terms like family violence, domestic violence, gender-based violence. But it's probably important we have a bit of a shared understanding of what those terms actually mean, because they are used, I guess, differently in different contexts. So when we talk about family violence, we use the definition provided in the Family Violence Protection Act here in Victoria, which is any behaviour by a person towards someone in their family, a family-like or intimate relationship that is physically, sexually, emotionally, psychologically or economically abusive, is threatening or coercive, or in any other way controls or dominates that person and causes them to feel fear for their safety or well-being or the safety of another person. So you can see that's quite a broad definition, and it also covers quite a lot of family relationships, not just intimate partner relationships. Family violence is prevalent and complex social issue, and one that has devastating, of course, and long-lasting impacts on all parts of people's lives. The terms family violence and domestic violence, they're often used interchangeably, but traditionally domestic violence has more been linked to intimate partner violence. But we're part of many national networks, and very often you'll hear the terms family and domestic violence used to cover the full range of definitions that are used across the country. Gender-based violence is violence directed against a person because of that person's gender, or a form of violence that disproportionately impacts a specific gender. So family and domestic violence is a gendered violence issue, meaning it predominantly affects women and children as well as gender diverse people. However, while we can recognise the gendered nature of family violence, it's important we use language that is inclusive and representative of all people who experience violence.
Thank you, Tania. You did talk about the terms. Why are the words and terms that we use so important when discussing this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. At Safe and Equal, family violence is our preferred terms in most contexts, as it's broader and more inclusive of diverse family units and kinship networks than any other term, and it's also clearly defined in our legislation. We often use family and gender-based violence when describing our work, as it reflects our vision and the work we do across the continuum, from primary prevention through to response and recovery. Family violence is an umbrella term that captures many different forms of abuse occurring in many kinds of relationships. So this can include physical abuse, but also includes emotional abuse. And you heard the definition that I read out before. It even includes things like spiritual abuse. You know, we even talk sometimes about systems abuse, and that is when people go to get support, particularly through things like the justice system. Sometimes that system can perpetuate some of the abuse that they've experienced before. You know, not all experiences or behaviours are easy to categorise, and sometimes they're inseparable, particularly with victim survivors often experiencing a range of abusive tactics. I think it's also important to be clear about what the term coercive control means. I'm sure everyone's been hearing a lot about coercive control, and it's a term that is more commonly used more in recent years, but can be tricky to understand, I think.
So, Tania, what is coercive control and how would you explain it?
So for us at Safe and Equal, coercive control is a pattern of abusive behaviours and tactics used by a perpetrator to gain power and control over a victim survivor. For us, all family violence includes an element of coercive control. We don't look at it as a separate or individual form of abuse because it's the underlying pattern in relationships. I think for us, we think about it underpinning all forms of family violence. It's present in physical abuse, emotional abuse, and so on. So there really isn't an ongoing pattern of family violence without some form of coercive control. Coercive control, it manifests in many different and overlapping ways and can occur across any type of family violence. For example, isolating someone from their family and friends, gaslighting, criticism and humiliation, limiting someone's autonomy and independence by not allowing them to work or study, controlling finances and limiting access to money, demanding sex, controlling what someone wears, eats, or what medications they can take, threatening children or pets, tracking and monitoring a person's activity on tracking apps or through stalking. And because abusers can be very good at hiding or masking their behaviour, coercive control can be quite difficult to clearly define or see from the outside. It can be as subtle as a look or a word. You know, I've heard before survivors talk about, you know, the clicking of a pen as the, you know, sort of start of this behaviour. So you can imagine what the impact is on someone by things that are so subtle and can't be easily explained. So something that can seem harmless on the surface can cause a survivor to feel incredibly fearful. And it's this feeling of fear that an abuser will use as a way to exert control.
Thank you, Tania. Intimate partner violence doesn't always mean violence within a heterosexual relationship, does it?
No, and which is why we prefer the broader definition. So while family violence is most commonly used by men against their current or former female partners, family violence does not discriminate and can be experienced by any person in any type of relationship, including in an intimate partner relationship between people of all genders, in parent or step-parent to child relationships, noting that family violence is also can result in child abuse. So those two issues are very linked as well. So when carers or those who may not be family members abuse people with disability, when older children and young people abuse their parents, siblings or other family members, when adult children abuse their parents, when family members or carers abuse older people, also known as elder abuse in kinship or family of choice relationships. So yeah, which is why it's really important, I think, when you work in family violence to have quite a broad perspective of what this could mean.
Thank you so much, Tania. So turning to you now, Jodie, from a WorkSafe perspective, why is it important to talk about family violence as a workplace issue?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kelly. And as Tania has spoken about, family violence is quite a broad and deep and complex issue in our society. And we also know that family violence is at a crisis point in our community. So we know that when we go to work, we spend a lot of time at work. So if family violence is in our community, it doesn't stop at the office door or the shop floor. It comes into our workplaces as well. And our workplaces have a big part to play in influencing the cultural and gender drivers of family violence, and also a big part to play in prevention. Also, employers have a responsibility or an obligation in order to provide a work environment that is safe and free from violence for all their employees, including victims, survivors of family violence, but also others in the workplace. So the workplace plays a central role in both prevention and response with family violence.
So, Jodie, what are some of the examples of how family violence can affect the workplace environment?
Yes, so given that family violence is a complex issue, it comes to work in many forms. Obviously, you can have people who are experiencing family violence in your workplace. So victim survivors who are at work, that family violence can enter the workplace through them experiencing the violence while at work. So perpetrators or people who use family violence can be using that violence during work hours. So either by coming physically into the workplace, which impacts the victim survivor, but also others in the workplace, by using technology, messaging tools, those kinds of things to be exerting control and violence on a victim survivor. Also, we know statistically that a lot of perpetrators prevent victim survivors from coming to work by either hiding car keys or by refusing care of children, etc. So it can affect a person's ability to actually be at work, to engage at work, and their health and safety at work. As I mentioned, it also impacts others in the workplace through people coming into workplaces. There are other ways as well. So you can have victims of family violence and perpetrators of family violence, or people that use family violence. They can be working in the same workplace. So you can have that situation, which is a fairly complex situation. And as Tania mentioned, family violence takes many forms. You can have someone who's going into a workplace where family violence is in that workplace. So, for example, if you're providing a service in someone's home, as an example, there could be elder abuse or family violence, and a worker can be going into that home. So there's heaps and heaps of ways that family violence enters the workplace. So that's why workplaces play a central role in both responding to and preventing family violence.
So, Tania, just what are the drivers of family violence, and what can workplaces do from a prevention perspective?
I think, I think people here might be familiar with an organisation called Our Watch, who have developed quite a strong evidence base around the drivers of family violence, and it's called Change the Story. And there's been a couple of iterations of this. So 4 key drivers of family violence are things like condoning of violence in our society, men's control of decision-making and limits to women's independence in public and private life, rigid gender stereotyping and dominant forms of masculinity, male peer relations and cultures of masculinity that emphasise aggression, dominance and control. So you can see that these are very much gendered issues, but there are, of course, overlapping forms of oppression that also amplify experiences of violence. And that can be things like homophobia, racism, ableism. All those things then amplify for certain categories of women or certain parts of our community the experience of violence. But in essence, gender inequality sits at the heart of this violence, and in order to prevent that, we need to also look at how we address some of those underlying impacts to eliminate violence, which is what we actually do when we speak about the work we do in primary prevention. It's about changing cultures, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviours around some of these key drivers.
Thanks, Tania. And Jodie, what broadly is the role of the workplace?
Yeah, so the workplace plays a big role in this. Like Tania just said, the workplace has a role in impacting and changing attitudes and behaviours more broadly as a society. So the workplace needs to be a place that is safe and very firmly stands against all forms of violence, including gendered violence and family violence. So that's around creating a culture where we don't tolerate certain types of behaviours or gender drivers that may drive these kinds of things. The other aspect that and role that a workplace has is in, like I mentioned earlier, providing a workplace that is safe and free from risk for employees and people coming into the workplace, so free from family violence. So employees have an obligation to make sure that they have policies and procedures around family violence, that they're creating a culture within that workplace where people feel more likely to report if they're experiencing family violence and it's impacting them. So that's really, really important. We know statistically that the majority of people who experience family violence and report family violence will tell a colleague or someone at work. So work can sometimes be a safe place away from violence and an opportunity for that person to engage with services and processes in order to help keep them safe. So it's really important that employers have policies and process in place around family violence, including family violence leave. We know that victim survivors of family violence are more likely to be able to keep themselves safe and or leave if they should choose a violent situation if they're employed. So having stable income is really important, and a workplace supporting an employee to stay employed is really important. So having access to leave and clear survivor-centered policies and processes that allow people to access that leave is really, really important. Also, making sure that you've trained your health and safety reps and managers and all staff in family violence, what to look for, how to maybe engage in a conversation if they're worried about a colleague. This is particularly important in terms of making sure that people feel confident to invite conversation or engage people they're worried about, but also that they're not inadvertently increasing someone's risk by, maybe not being led by what the person who's experiencing the violence might want, because we know that victim survivors of family violence are experts in their own experience and also in keeping themselves safe. So it's important that your training includes that kind of information. It's also important to have do risk assessments in the workplace. Even if you don't think you have family violence coming into the workplace, chances are you do, statistically we know. So you need to do risk assessments to make sure that you're putting controls in place to keep both victim survivors and also other people in the workplace safe. So that's things about monitoring who comes into a workplace, how we know about them being in the workplace, barriers, so it's things about the physical environment, but also things around technology. How is technology used in your workplace? Another important aspect, which is also a little difficult can be difficult to speak about, is we know that if we have victim survivors of family violence in our workplaces, we also have perpetrators or people who use family violence in our workplaces. So it's important to keep that in mind and be aware, is your workplace or are your technologies and work tools and time in work being used for someone that you employ who's perpetrating family violence. That's really, really important as well to keep that in mind when you're doing risk assessments. And WorkSafe has done a lot of work in this area in order to support employers to do risk assessments and take steps to put controls in place, ensuring that people are safe. We actually have family violence guidance for employers. It's aimed at employers that helps you talks through steps of the way employers can begin to do this, and we have links to other resources and stuff.
Thank you so much. Tania, do you have any recent data that illustrates the situation across our community?
Yeah, there's lots of data around this issue. So 94% of women who experienced violence since the age of 15 did so at the hands of a male perpetrator, but also for men who've experienced violence, that has also been at the hands of a male perpetrator. So you can really see that this is a gendered issue. And I think before, when I was talking about the amplifiers for certain groups of women or people in our community, so compared to non-Indigenous women, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women experience 8 times the rates of homicide. Women with disabilities are more likely to experience violence from multiple perpetrators, including carers and family members, and over longer periods of time. Those on temporary visas, excuse me, report higher levels of abuse enabled by discriminatory migration policies and practices. And historically, 2 in 5 LGBTIQA plus people reported being in intimate relationships where they had been abused by partners. And for bisexual women and trans and gender diverse people, particularly trans women, rates of intimate partner violence are even higher. And just kind of coming back to the workplace, so with 1 in 3 women having experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner since the age of 15, chances are pretty high that there's a survivor of gender-based violence amongst every group of people we know, including in workplaces. And according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, between 55 and 70% of women who've experienced or are currently experiencing violence participate in the workforce. So that's around 1 in 6 female workers. So it's probably safe to say most, if not all, workplaces will employ someone who's impacted by family violence. So all the things that Jodie was talking about before are so critical for workplaces given these statistics.
Tania, there seems to be a real shift and attitudes seem to be the key to addressing the situation. Are they changing?
Yeah, I think they are changing, but not fast enough. So there's still some deeply concerning attitudes, according to the most recent National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey results. So 35% of people believe that women exaggerate how unequally they're treated, and 35% of people believe sexual assault allegations are commonly used to get back at men. So one of the most striking findings, I think, is that most Australians don't believe family and gender-based violence is a problem in their own community. Only 47% agree that violence against women was a problem in their own suburb or town. So that's a pretty interesting statistic given how much we talk about this, how much we talk about the prevalence of violence. I think creating communities that are safe for people experiencing violence, and that's people of all ages, requires a shift in these beliefs and attitudes. So if we really want to eliminate family violence, we really need to address the underlying cultures and social norms that lead to these beliefs and attitudes.
Thank you, Tania. So what advice would you have for an employee who is facing abuse in their personal life about getting help at work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of think about it in a different way because I think Jodie mentioned a whole range of really important things before, and it was really great to hear all the things that WorkSafe have in place to address this. But in the first instance, for anyone to be comfortable about coming forward about getting help at work, it's really important that the employer upholds a workplace culture and environment that is safe and supportive for people experiencing violence to come out and get help. So we really can't expect individuals to reach out for help at work if those supports aren't in place and aren't clearly communicated. And Jodie mentioned a range of training and things that need to be put in place, particularly for key roles and responsibilities within the organisation where people might go to for help. So whether it's their manager or certain peer roles that have been targeted for support. So, but for colleagues who might be concerned also about someone they work with, I would say don't let fear or discomfort get in the way of offering support. Find a quiet space to talk privately, ask if the person is okay, gently tell them what's worrying them, offer them support, ask what they need. People are often so afraid they'll say the wrong thing, but saying silent is also dangerous. So it's so important that people experiencing violence know there's support out there for them. My advice would be to just approach conversations with kindness and compassion and without judgment. If all those things are in the workplace, then I think employees will feel more safe and supported to come out and seek some of the supports in the workplace. I have had victim survivors say to me before that it was the workplace that made all the difference for them getting help. Because if you think about it, people spend so much time at work work can be the safe space, and that's where they go to get the help. And I think Jodie referred to all those issues before in her her points about what workplaces can do. So I think for employees who are feeling like they need some support and they feel like the environment is open and supportive, they need to know who and where to get help from. And then I think it will open the door for people to seek support and advice.
Thanks, Tania. Jodie, do you have anything to add on what managers or colleagues working with someone that they think may be suffering family violence can do? Or is there anything that WorkSafe has that can be provided to them to support those conversations or to support the person in their workplace?
Yeah, so echoing what Tania just said, it's really important to feel confident to have a conversation. So to approach someone and say, I'm worried about you. I think it's so important that people do that, because it's better to do that than to do nothing and stay silent, like Tania said. And I think workplaces, like, we spend so much time at work, and our workplaces are now in our homes as well with work from home. So I think employers now more than ever have an obligation to ensure that their workers are safe, and that includes from family violence. So I would encourage workplaces to engage with it. Don't shy away from family violence, because like Tania said, you do have victim survivors working in your workplace. So WorkSafe, like I said, we have guidance, family violence as a workplace issue guidance, which has a whole range of information and strategies to help you do risk assessments and to put things in place in order to support workers, because we want to keep victim survivors employed, and we want to make sure that them and their colleagues are safe. So I would just encourage employers to engage and jump on our website and have a look at that guidance.
Tania and Jodie, it's been a really interesting, difficult but interesting discussion. Before we move to audience questions, think about the one thing you'd like our audience to remember from today's discussion. So I'll go to you first, Jodie. What would be that one thing you would like the people listening here today to remember?
That's a great question. I think that the one thing I would like people to take away is that family violence doesn't stop at the office door or the factory gate, that it does come into our workplaces, and our workplaces have a really important role to play. So I'd really like people who are engaging and watching this webinar to feel confident to engage more with family violence as a workplace issue and feel confident to take action, and particularly employers, in order to fulfill their obligations. This is something that you can and should do something about.
Thanks, Jodie and Tania. What would be that one thing that you would like, or one or two things that you would like our audience to take away from today's discussion?
Yeah, so just continuing, I think Jodie's positive sort of end note there. I think just to say that family violence, please remember, family violence is preventable. But to end it, we all have to commit and act. And I think, workplace is a really important area where you can build important community awareness about family violence, and that it's a good place to sort of acknowledge that it's no longer an issue that should be kept behind closed doors. So I think just remember, we all have a role, but we all can prevent this. So there is a good ending to this if we all work together and change those fundamental norms and behaviours that are leading to this violence in the first place.
Thank you both. We now are going to take some questions for the audience, and we've touched on this a little bit actually in the discussion, but it's a really interesting question. So I'm interested to hear your response. So, what strategies might you suggest when responding to complex relationships of family members who are suffering from domestic violence and are working at the same workplace?
Would you like Tania to take that first, or me?
Well, you can both contribute. Who would like to take the lead on answering that one?
Look,
You go ahead, Jodie, and then I'll come in after you.
Yeah, because Tania probably has the technical expertise around the complexity. In terms of a workplace, there are practical things you have to take. So you have to do a risk assessment like you would do any risk assessment. Do those people work together? Are they on the same location? Do they have what contact do they come in with each other? And then what you would want to look at doing is a safety plan that you would want to do, which should be led by the victim survivor. So what things can you put in place that the victim survivor wants in place in order to mitigate the risk or control the risk and ensure their safety? So WorkSafe can help with providing guidance on safety planning. And then you also want to have clear policies and procedures in your workplace around engaging how your workplace is going to engage with people who use family violence or perpetrate family violence. So that's a complex issue, but we need to be clear around that and how the workplace is going to deal with that. So there are different things that you can do to put in place, like you would in other areas that you deal with workers who are using violence or sexual harassment in the workplace. There's a lot of crossover there. So those are two key things off the bat that you should do. But anything that you should do should be informed by, consulted with the victim survivor who keep themselves safe and work at keeping themselves safe every day. So you need to ensure that you're consulting with them. Also, bringing your health and safety reps engaged in that process as well, because health and safety reps are there in order to help provide support and be consulted in this process. They're often really expert in how work is done. So getting ideas from them around controls that you can put in place for the risk. And another thing that workplaces should do is they should appoint family violence contact officers. So this is a point of contact that victim survivors can go to in the workplace to be supported through this process. Tania, have you got anything else to add?
No, I think that's a fantastic answer, Jodie. The only thing I would say is that, obviously the workplace, people meet at work all the time, so it's not an uncommon scenario. So it is really, really important that there are policies and procedures in place, particularly also those that hold perpetrator to account for their behaviour as well. And it's really important that any contact points, we make sure that they're not colluding with the perpetrator and a whole range of things. But I think everything Jodie said is really solid. And I think it really goes to the preparation of the workplace, making sure you've got your procedures and your policies in place so that you can enact them as soon as the risk becomes known to you. So that's a really important part of why you have to really do that work. It's not just about family violence leave. It's about all the other things that sit around it to make the environment enabling and safe for the survivor. But yeah.
Thanks, Tania. And it's interesting that we talk about the working environment. It has changed significantly over recent years. So how best can a workplace provide a safe workplace with the hybrid work arrangements when employees are working from home?
I'm happy to say a couple of things, but I'm sure, Jodie, you have things in place already at WorkSafe that you probably want to let everyone know about. But I think, this was an interesting thing during COVID. I think, when we were locked down, particularly in Victoria, for such a long time, where we were really worried about people who might be in family violence relationships. And we actually receive the services that we represent here at the P received a lot of third-party calls. So friends and family would ring up on behalf of people to say, hey, my friend is locked down. We're really worried about her. What can we do? So I think one of the really important things about hybrid working situations is making sure you've got good ways to check in with people who are working from home, and making sure that anything you have in the physical workplace environment is available for people who are working from home as well, and make sure that the person who might be experiencing violence has a good network of contacts and can get in contact with people when and if in a safe way. So nothing that exacerbates the violence, because of course sometimes acting can exacerbate violence in perverse ways. So you've got things that are in place for people to be able to get access to whatever workplace supports they need. But I'm sure WorkSafe already has taken that into consideration.
Yeah, so I can add to that, Tania. Lockdown changed a lot of things for us, and like you said, we were mandated to stay at home. So a lot of people were told they now had to be at home to do their work, where previously work was a place that they were safe, and so that they were free from family violence, or relatively free in that space. So this was prior to my time at WorkSafe, but we did work with WorkSafe in order to create some guidelines and tools for employers around how to do risk assessments and support employees in experiencing family violence whilst working from home. One of those things was that you need to be flexible around how you have around your work from home policies. So, you know, enforcing, which isn't a problem now, but making people work from home is not always an option. So ensuring that people have flexibility in terms of where they work, particularly if they're experiencing family violence. So that could be in the workplace, could be at the home, it could be at another location if your workplace has multiple sites, or it could be another location that you arrange for them. So it's close to their home, but it's not in their home. So they still have the flexibility of not having to come into the office and commute, so they can fulfill caring responsibilities, but maybe it's not in their own home, maybe it's somewhere else local. So it's about being creative and thinking outside the box around what you can do to support victim survivors who are engaging in work, because we want to, as I said, we want to keep them engaged in work. So there's lots of things that you can do, and like Tania said, it's providing people with the same resources that they would have in the office and the same opportunities they would have in the office in terms of accessing services and supports, checking in with people, being aware of things. You know, if someone, when they're working from home, always has their camera off, you know, if they're constantly interrupted in meetings and have to go away, or if you don't have, you know, calling, checking in on people, and having conversations, and also a workplace that is talking about these kinds of issues regularly and providing reminders around services people can contact, etc. These things make it more likely that a victim survivor will feel comfortable and supported to raise an issue if they have one, including if they're working from home, but might seek support or adjustments in order to manage their situation. So it's about staying in contact, and that's where those family violence contact officers are really important, and making sure that they're really well trained and supported as well.
That's really interesting, Jodie. I've never thought about someone always having their camera off, that it could be an indicator, or always getting interrupted. Does WorkSafe provide any guidance material on how to conduct a workplace family violence at risk assessment, and that would include some of those things to look for?
Yeah, so our guidance has a lot of information in our family violence, the workplace issue, but you can also ring our advisory line, our psychosocial help advisory line, and they can put you in contact with more detailed resources and tools, and people at WorkSafe who can support you to do that as an employer.
Thank you. There's probably another question here for you, Jodie. It's got a lot of likes, so people are interested. So given the findings of the recent report on the usage of the new family and domestic violence leave entitlement, it may be that many employers don't understand it. Have WorkSafe considered a campaign that raises awareness of family domestic violence as an OHS issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and the leave, it's one thing to have leave, but access and the way workers are supported to use that leave is another thing. Having the leave, I think, Tania, you mentioned earlier, having the leave in of itself is not enough. It's all those things that go around it. I can't speak to whether Workplace has thought about a campaign on this. I can see, and obviously the community sees, that there is space and need for this, and this is an area that WorkSafe should potentially think about engaging on, particularly because we do have guidance. So I can't speak in the future. I think it's a great idea to have for WorkSafe to have a campaign. What we do have at the moment, and people might have seen, and we'll be doing some more bursts of this campaign in the future, is we do have our work-related gendered violence campaign, which is around all forms of work-related violence and sexual harassment. So that's probably the first time that WorkSafe has had a public campaign in this area of work-related gendered violence. So maybe family violence, in future campaigns, maybe that would be something we could do. But I could definitely see, like the questioner obviously can, is that it would be a space that would be really helpful in providing some campaigns and things that would support employers and employees.
Thanks, Jodie. Might be something to take back to the boss.
Mm.
Tania, what is a good way to broach and discuss the topic of family violence with a colleague who you think may be a victim?
Yeah, this is such a good question, and we get it all the time. I've worked in this area for 20 years or nearly 22 years. It's not an easy thing to do. So I just want to acknowledge that to everybody. So please don't worry if you're nervous about it or if you're concerned about it. It is a hard thing to do. But I think one of the things that we always say, we have a website with tools and guidance called Are You Safe at Home? So it's about what friends and family can do and how they can approach the subject with people. So it applies to people in workplaces as well, so colleagues. Um, I think the issue is you don't have to come out and say immediately, or are you experiencing violence at home? But, you can just come out and say, hey, is everything okay at home? How are you going? Is anything, is there any support I can give you, around some of those things? And then you may find you don't get a response from somebody because they're not ready to disclose. It takes time to build rapport and trust. So, but persevere, so don't think, oh, well, I asked and it's okay. Then maybe, a little bit later, a week or 2 weeks later, and you see this person is still, struggling, you could ask again and just say, look, I just want to say I'm here if you need anything. Is everything okay? Is there anything going on at home? That's the way that I think is the easiest way to approach this. But, it's also hard for experts, when they're sitting down and doing these, really complex risk assessments with people and asking them such personal questions. It's not an easy thing to do, but at some point we all have to take some responsibility for helping others, because that's what changes attitudes and beliefs. It's no longer sort of behind closed doors. It's something that we can talk about publicly. It's something that we can try and address, something we can all do. That's what we say when it's everybody's business. You probably have heard that before. Family violence is everyone's business. Well, what does that mean? It means that we all try and lean in a little bit and try and help those there. But please, if people want some guidance or some resources, please go to the website we have, areyousafeathome.org.au, or one word. There'll be heaps of guidance on there about how to approach conversations, what some of the signs might be of people who are struggling. So really encourage people to reach out.
Thanks, Tania. There's lots of questions coming in around the obligations of a workplace. So are workplaces required to report to authorities, for example, the police, if an employee raises concerns of domestic violence at work?
Yeah, great question. No, workplaces are not obligated to report to police. And in fact, you need to be really careful about engaging police, because if a workplace who thinks they're doing the right thing by reporting to police because they're concerned about a worker who's disclosed family violence, you can actually increase the risk and put that worker in more harm's way. The family violence can escalate. So it's important to be really careful around doing that. It's really important to consult with and be guided by the worker who is experiencing family violence. That being said, if family violence is coming into your workplace and it's putting your employee or other employees at immediate risk, so someone's coming to the workplace threatening, using violence, that is an example where an employer does need to take appropriate actions like they would with any other violence coming into the workplace. And that may involve calling the police and other procedures that you have in your emergency risk management plan. So we know that employers are obligated, you have to have an emergency risk management plan. That's things around fires. It's all that training we have to do every year around your fire wardens and what happens if you get threats to the workplace. So you need to having family violence as part of those plans that you have set up is really important, but being really clear around what is the level of risk and how is it coming into the workplace, because you don't want to put someone at increased risks, only if you're concerned about immediate safety of people that fall under your obligation.
We're almost at time. We've got time for one more question. So, Tania, What is the biggest challenge you see for workplaces when responding to and managing family violence?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think for me, I think it's creating a consistent enabling culture so that people feel comfortable to come forward. You know, we've talked a lot about the systems and processes that should be in place, but it's really, if we don't have supportive attitudes and cultures in workplace for people to really feel confident to come forward, then they won't. So, you know, Jodie mentioned before, you know, there's all these requirements around leave. Obviously, people need to know about the leave, but it's not just about the leave, but to actually access it. They've got to feel confident their information is going to be protected, and that they're not, it's an interesting thing, you know, that it's not always something that comes to you first off, but perpetrators might be able to see people's pay slips. So they might see what leave they've accessed, which is why it's really important that we don't call it family and violence leave, you know, in the workplace. So all these things that we have to be so careful about. But in my experience over all these years and over, you know, multiple consults in different workplaces and things like that, I think having really good systems and processes is really great, and they can be done, especially in organisations that have really good systems and processes. But really working hard at that culture and attitudes level is really, really important, I think, to enable that people to feel confident to come forward. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Tania. And thank you, Jodie, for joining us today. It has been a great discussion, and we really appreciate you sharing your insights today about how family violence can be treated in the workplace. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Jodie.
Look, we hope you found this an interesting and informative session. This webinar will be available on WorkSafe's website in the coming weeks. We very much value your opinion on our Health and Safety Month events, and so shortly we'll be sending out an online survey. So please provide your please provide your feedback in that survey so that we can incorporate your suggestions into our program for next year. And all respondents will go into a draw to win one of $500 gift cards. We will shortly show on screen a list of all the contacts or programs that we've covered today. If you have any requests or require further information, please get in touch. Our advisory line is open from 7:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, and the emergency line is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, thank you so much for being part of this webinar.